Welcome, everyone, to the Sponsor CX webinar, Bold Activation meets Sponsorship Results at United Airlines. I'm Jim Andrews, your host, and I am really excited to introduce our guest for today's webinar, Derek Russell, who is Manager of Global Sponsorship Activation for United. Derek, it's great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us. Let me just give you a little bit a background on Derek. We were just discussing he's been at United in his role for working on some of the company's largest and most prominent partnerships for coming up on 10 years. So congratulations on just about reaching that milestone, Derek. Also previous experience on the agency side with our friends at TSMGI, worked on a number of different brand client projects there, I know. Graduate of the University of Illinois and an MBA from DePaul University. Again, like I said, really appreciative of you and taking the time to be here with us today.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. Appreciate it. And yeah, glad to be here as well.
Excellent. So let's just start off with maybe kind of set the stage a little bit for our conversation, and we'll get the audience to participate as well with their questions. But why don't you just give us an overview of what are the sponsorship strategy for United? What are your different goals, your objectives for your partnerships? Because you've got so many. I didn't even want to start listing them because I know we're going to talk about a bunch of them. But lots of different sports properties, yeah, just tell us a little bit about the approach to sponsorship there.
Yeah, absolutely. At the end of the day, Jim, we want to be the biggest and best airline in the world, and sponsorships is a fantastic tool to really help us accomplish that objective. A few things related to that, right? Again, we want to be not just the biggest, best airline, but I tell people this all the time. We're a global airline with a regional focus, with a hub-based focus, right? So, when you talk about goals and objectives, we want to be far and away the preferred and favorite airline locally. And when I talk about our sponsorships, particularly with fans of said property, sponsor, whatever, of that team, right? So, we want to be their favorite airline. We also want to make sure our sponsorship and how we activate it, right, it makes sense to fans, and they feel like we're additive to the overall experience, right? We don't want to feel like a distraction when we're activating. Ultimately, we want fans to spend money on our airline, and I say that to say we want them to like us, and we want them to go out of their way to spend money on us, right? And fly us because we're the product for them. We're the best product in the market, right? So again, not just because we're a default option, but because our sponsorship had something to do with it, and how we contribute along with the rest of the ecosystem we have in that market. So yeah, that's really what it boils down to, regardless of where we're at.
Oh, that makes sense. And, I think a lot of times in lots of different categories, right? We, as consumers, we think we're making completely 100% rational decisions, right? And certainly with an airline ticket purchase, yes, you are obviously going to look at the schedule, the cost, all of that, who's got the boats, who's got the non-stops versus the one-stops and all of that kind of stuff. But we all know, especially in markets like Chicago and other big markets, you still have a choice, and a lot of it there is you are choosing between airlines, and you do want to, like, especially with an airline, you want to have that trust. You want to like the airline. You want to feel like they're going to give you a good experience. So I'm imagining that's where you say these partnerships, and especially the activations, can kind of really make a difference.
Absolutely. It's really, it boils down to creating an emotional connection as much as we possibly can with our sponsorships, right? There's only so many ways that in traditional brand marketing you can evoke emotion with the brand. You can do it, obviously, but sponsorships are a great bridge between the brand, team that a fan is passionate of, and us, right? And if we can put ourselves forward in a way that connects with the fan, makes sense with the team, that's when you're talking about creating an emotional connection and making people, feel good about us, feel good about flying us, and go out of their way to select us, right? So creating that emotional connection, I say that a lot, but that's really what we're trying to do with a lot of our activations.
Yeah. And does that work for B2C as well as B2B? Because obviously you have a lot of business travel. I'm sure is a big business travelers are a big segment for you. Is that the same, or is there more of a skew of your partnerships towards the traveling public, if you will?
Yeah, I I'll say this. Every team that we sponsor, right? Travel is somewhere in their ecosystem, right? Teams need to fly to play games.
Right.
Front offices need to scout. Sales folks need to meet, current and prospective customers. So travel is certainly a key component to, what makes a team, property, entity, organization, whatever that we sponsor. It's certainly a key component, right? So, as it pertains to United, that's certainly a consideration, and always, we'll call it part of any negotiation or discussion is where we can endemically insert ourselves, within the organization, right? So, that's always a useful marketing claim, right? Proud to fly X team, right? So, that's certainly within the consideration set, and it's more than just travel, right? It's making the travel a seamless experience. So typically we'll work in we'll call it like amenity funds. So basically, certain amount of status built into our agreements for members of the front office, that sort of thing. So it's certainly always a component to our deals.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And then the other big thing I think of with airlines is loyalty programs, right? So I'm a proud Mileage Plus member, and certainly get lots of marketing communications from United about that and all of the benefits there. That's critical across the segment. Is connecting sponsorships to that program for you and the benefits there? Is that also important?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say creating value for Mileage Plus members, and being a member with United, it's a logical and frankly a useful way to activate our sponsorships. Name a sponsor, name a team we sponsor, and I could probably give you a few good experiences that we offer up for Mileage Plus members. We talk about current Mileage Plus members are members with a lot of miles. Principally, this type of activation, comes in the form of experiences on our Mileage Plus exclusives site. So basically, folks can use miles in order to bid on, money can't buy VIP type experiences, right? So, useful way to activate a lot of our biggest relationships here in Chicago, Houston, New York, et cetera. All of our main hubs, right? Loyalty is also, or Mileage Plus programs, also a great way I should say, activating through our sponsorships is a great way to recruit Mileage Plus members as well, locally or beyond. Sweepstakes are a common tactic for us to activate on that front, right? So, enter sweepstakes for, again, another exclusive experience or flights on United. And by the way, register for Mileage Plus, and here's a lot of the great benefits in order to register to be a Mileage Plus member. So, useful recruiting tool, but also a good engagement tool as well for longstanding Mileage Plus members. And I mentioned it at the top. It's quite this answer, but at the end of the day, we want to create value for our members and new members, right? So loyalty is certainly a key component of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's focus a little bit on your specific role. You have responsibility for programs that span a lot of different objectives, right? Your brand positioning, audience relevance, as you talked about, experiential marketing, content strategy, PR. So the first thought that comes to my mind when I look at that kind of a job description is, boy, how much of your role and your time is spent kind of coordinating internally to make sure all of those different things are happening, and assuming managing agencies that you're working with that are supporting you, yeah, versus just the working directly with your partners, right, and those different properties. Because I think sometimes there's maybe not that awareness on the property side. It's like, oh, Derek's job is basically to deal with me, right? It's like, yeah, but there's a lot more to it than that, right?
Yeah, I was trying to think of, I'm trying to think of a percentage. I'm not even sure I can attribute it, but it's a significant chunk of my time. And I kind of wrap it up into this. The magic of sponsorships doesn't happen when you sign the deal; it happens when you activate it. And I can't really do that alone. We have a lot of smart people that work here at United, within our team, within corporate communications where I sit, or even our broader organization, and plus agency help, right? A lot of smart people working towards a common goal. And frankly, it takes everybody to really maximize the value of the sponsorships that we have. To properly activate them, here within the local market and beyond. And really, again, make that in order to really create that emotional connection with fans of the teams that we sponsor. It takes up a lot of my time because here's the thing: at the end of the day, I mentioned this before. I want to create as much value, for value from our sponsorships as possible for Miles Plus members and beyond. And it really takes a village in order to do that. I can't come up with the ideas myself. I can't, work with other. It's not just our team, our sponsorships team here at United, right? A lot of people have really useful, valuable perspectives on what can make our sponsorships tick. It's really creating that environment, having meetings, brainstorming sessions, focused briefing, even technical conversations. All that really helps maximize the value that we derive from our sponsorship. So, specifically answer your question, it takes up a lot of time.
Well, and I always think the brain mentioned the brainstorming and idea creation, and obviously that's so fundamental, right, to making sure that you're coming up with ideas that are going to be relevant to the folks you're trying to talk to, and maybe new and different to kind of keep things fresh and all of that. Is that something where do you involve your property partners in those conversations as well?
Mm-hmm. For sure. And I actually, if I didn't have, you did set it up that way, I was going to mention that properties are critical for this, right? Frankly, I like to work them in as much of the conversation as possible because having their perspective, we could be running down a certain path and just be wasting our time because the property wasn't involved, right? So making sure that I found that keeping the property in lockstep and keeping in communication on, hey, here's kind of the strategy we're setting, here's the direction we're going, here's a few tactics that we plan on aligning on. Is this a run afoul of IP? Is there any potential logistical hurdles we might run into in order to do this? Is there any awkward timing with other partners? So it's keeping the partner involved and ideas churning with them. That's critical. And to me, the properties have an excellent perspective on this as well. There's properties have so many other sponsors that are also activating similarly, right? So, well, not in the airline space, but trying to derive the most value in their respective vertical, right? So, properties have a lot of valuable ideas too, and really useful for trying to create value for United for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's critical, and as you said, they should know, hopefully, that their audiences, their fans, even better than you do. So,
Absolutely.
and it's interesting because producer Laura dropped a question in the chat as we were getting started today, and I'm going to assume, I haven't looked specifically at all of the attendees who are with us today, but usually we have mostly folks on the property side with us, and she asked them what percentage of their time is spent on activating partnerships. And again, so these are, I'm assuming, mostly people on the brand side, and I'm seeing a range that the lowest number is 40%, 40 to 75%, and that's that's obviously a lot of their time and effort, but worth it, right? We always talk about, we understand what the value of activation is to the sponsor, right? But there is a lot of value in that activation to the property as well. Number one, keeping you happy, and making sure that you're getting the results that you need and coming back and renewing. And having a long-term relationship, but also just the attention, the maybe sometimes it can be an assist with organizations that need ticket sales or something. I mean, that's your activation is their marketing, right? And it's marketing that they're not paying for. So I'm glad to see those numbers as high as they are. So these are obviously folks and organizations that understand how important it is. That they're contributing to the activation efforts.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. Also, one thing I should have said up front, and I'll say it a couple of times, is we definitely want to hear from you. We'd love to take your questions for Derek, and there's the chat box there where you've been typing in and answering some of Laura's questions, but there's also, if you scroll up to the top there, the Q&A box. So if you have questions at any point during our time here today, go ahead and type those in. I'll keep an eye on it. Maybe I'll take some on the fly. If not, we'll save some of them until the end. But definitely, if you think of a question, don't be shy. Go ahead and put it in there. Derek, why don't we talk about some specific activations? We're talking in general, and we're talking theory, but you've had some good stuff going on there at United, so tell us about some of the stuff that you've been working on recently, or maybe if you can give us a hint of something that might be coming up. Anything kind of stand out in terms of the successful programs?
Yeah, absolutely. One of my favorites just wrapped up. So, Jim, I know you're familiar here in Chicago. But we've been the official airline of the Chicago Blackhawks for over 30 years, coinciding with the United Center opening up. And they actually just celebrated their centennial celebration for the 2025-26 season. And we wanted to be a part of that in a big way. So big that we created I think it's a 35XL jersey for a dinosaur in the B concourse at O'Hare. So, for those of the folks in the call who aren't familiar, there's a giant dinosaur skeleton in the B concourse at O'Hare. And, in order to celebrate the Blackhawks centennial, we actually created a custom Blackhawks jersey to put on the dinosaur. And also, along with that, wrapped the B concourse and C concourse signs at O'Hare with a special Blackhawks font, B, Blackhawks font C, Blackhawks numbers for each of the gate signs. So, when you talk about activating in an endemic way, that's a useful way to do it, right? It was a big, I mentioned working cross-functionally. That requires a lot of conversations, not just internally, but with the Chicago Department of Aviation and other folks at the airport in order to make that happen. It's a big endeavor, but was really happy to see that all come together. And you talk about the purpose behind that. Obviously we don't really have an issue with recognition per se amongst Hawks fans or Chicago in general, right? But an initiative like this really helps with authenticity and really helps. It's a way that we can leverage our own assets as an airline to really stand out. And obviously there's so much traffic coming in and out of O'Hare. not just with Chicagoans and beyond, but that's a big, visible way that we can really celebrate the Blackhawks for sure.
Yeah, okay. Good attention.
Yeah, and I mean, and I would say, obviously that's one example, but kind of pulling on that authenticity thread a bit. Authenticity is a big thing for us, and it performs well for us in general, right? Whether it's leaning into sponsored content where we're kind of highlighting, we'll call it flight bits of players, getting off of charter flights, landing in a particular city. That's somewhere where we lean into pretty heavily. Fans obviously love the players, or even like we work in the New Jersey Devils on highlighting local neighborhood spots that the Devils players themselves enjoy. Right. Yeah, those are kind of the authentic ways we try and lean into us as an airline and being authentic to the places that we serve and how fans take in those types of activations, right? Well, we always try to be local in how we activate, kind of ensure fans recognize us and hopefully see us as part of a community. At the end of the day, it's the same community that our employees live, work, and serve too. So we want to make sense and we want to fit there as well.
Yeah, exactly. You said mention, I see in our chat that Kelsey is joining us from the Field Museum, and she wanted to point out that is a Field Museum dinosaur fossil cast that we have there at Concourse B.
I should have mentioned that up front. Yes, and very much a cooperation with the Field Museum as well. Really, frankly, can't do that. Really, frankly, can't do this without them and their support. So, Field Museum, certainly Chicago institution. So, big thank you to them for letting us do that for sure.
Exactly. Yeah, so and I see questions are popping in, and that's great. I'm going to do a mix of some of the ones that I have, and we'll throw in the audience questions as well. But and I think there's actually this question I wanted to ask you, Derek, and I think I saw one that popped up with a similar in a similar vein, and that is United has a lot of longtime partnerships in the portfolio. It's not, you're not going in and out of these things, right? You mentioned the United Center, that 30 years, and even when you have a sponsorship like, and I'm going to point to the Golden State Warriors because you guys have won awards for that in terms of the activation with the franchise fund, which maybe some of our folks are familiar with, and you can talk about the details of that if you want. But in this context, I mean, you've got something that clearly is working, but even those, at some point, you have to look at it and say, well, do we need to do something a little bit different? We don't want to leave this partnership, but especially then on the activations, do we need a refresh? Do we need to come in to make sure that we're staying relevant and top of mind? And so, yeah, obviously something like the Blackhawks jersey at O'Hare on the Dinosaur can do that, right? It's like, oh yeah, maybe I hadn't been really paying attention to United and the Blackhawks and their partnership, and that brings it back. But so how important is that kind of like looking at things and saying we need to do something a little bit different here to stay top of mind?
Yeah, absolutely. And briefly talk about franchise fund. We I would say one of the ways that we put in that we come to life in the communities that we live, work, and serve is making sure we being mission driven and understanding within that market, what we should be doing in order to make a difference, right? Franchise fund was born from the pandemic. A lot of small and mid-sized businesses are really struggling in the Bay Area, and the Warriors and us recognized that and said, how can we make a difference, right? So, we, instead of just offering money, it's easy, but we wanted to create a foundation of potential long-term success and wealth creation, right? So we actually worked with the National Minority of Supplier Development Council in the West region to put together a program and curriculum where these small, medium-sized minority businesses in the Bay Area could develop the I won't even just say skills. They're successful businesses in their own right, but give them the ability to work with large enterprise level businesses like United, right? The reality is these are business owners who are extraordinarily busy, and it takes a lot of time and investment to understand how to work with a large corporation like United. So this curriculum through the National Minority Supplier Development Council, NMSDC, really helps those businesses own those skills, right? And we've been doing it for several years now, and it's still very successful. Something that we point to as far as mission-driven activations that make a difference in our the communities that we live, work, and serve. Why to get back to what you originally asked? When do you know it's time for a refresh? So I'll say this. Data wise, you're going to see some drop off in impressions, and maybe as well as just overall value creation, right? That's just kind of on the metric side. But I would say most crucially, it's starting from a very familiar and honest conversation, honest relationship with our partners, with every property, right? I don't need them to tell us that everything's going great. I really just need them to tell us what's working, what's not, and how everything's performing, right? And we'll do that measurement ourselves, but it's really that honest conversation, having that relationship where we're all on the same page, trying to accomplish, trying to make United the biggest and best airline. And if something is not working, chances are we all kind of see it in the numbers, and it's really just having that honest conversation and figuring out where to go next. It's not always easy, especially when it's something that you've done for a long time, or maybe maybe you just have a great relationship with whoever is managing that program, and it's just sometimes it's just time to try something new. And at the end of the day, coming from the same place, having that honest conversation, that really helps kind of ease that transition into doing the next great thing that creates value for United.
And this is, I guess, in a related vein, because you have all of those long-term partnerships, and Latricia asked a question here in terms of how then, I'm going to paraphrase her question, are you then, how do you know when it's optimal to add something new and bring the, so and I guess that kind of broader question there is United Airlines kind of in the marketplace looking for new opportunities to kind of add to the portfolio, switch things up? I mean, that to me is from a strategy standpoint is probably a big challenge, right? It's like, boy, you don't want to drop things that are working. You don't have an unlimited budget to add all these cool things that are out there. So how do you decide that kind of new versus old mix?
Yeah, I would say that broadly, when you're talking we'll call it like 5-year plan, right? We have a pretty good idea. We don't onboard a lot of new partnerships, and a lot of that is just a budget and resource constraint. There's certainly a lot of room over the course of 5 years to change how we're activating and approaching said market. Of course, things could change in like 2 years, and then all of a sudden, we're leaning heavily into X hub, and we really want to lean into those relationships or onboard something, right? So, as it pertains to like our 5-year horizon, again, we're not typically adding a lot of new partnerships. It's a lot of shifting dollars within hubs essentially. I say in and out of hubs. I would say leaning into some hubs more than others, depending on strategy, and then laddering up activations where necessary. That's where a lot of it comes from. Um, and yeah, that's really where we spend a lot of our time focusing. There's something to be said about building brand equity, especially in the properties that we're in. There's a reason that we selected all the properties that we sponsor, right? There's a reason we attached ourselves to United Center 31 years ago. I'm a big believer in um, where you can being first to an arena or stadium, because you really build in that equity, right? It's the United Center. It's literally been the United Center the entire time the United Center's been an arena, right? So
Anything else.
yeah, exactly. We've got a lot of equity built in there, a lot of equity built into all of our partnerships. Again, there's a reason we were entered them in the first place. So yeah, that's really the position that we're coming from, for sure.
And that was actually, and I assumed we would get a question like this, and I think you pretty much just answered it. But Alex asked about the fact that United is a global airline with regional hubs. So how do you look at regional or local partnership opportunities? That might not give you much traction beyond that, but again, it sounds like you're leaning into certain markets, and that can change over time, but that really is the strategy, rather than looking for something that is a big national play. Is that safe to say?
Yeah, exactly. And if you look at our sponsorship portfolio, you pick out a pretty common pattern where we're aligning with call it like high profile local sports teams or high profile venues that are meaningful locally. A really good example of that is Red Rocks. Red Rocks near Denver, right? You're talking about one of the most iconic concert venues in the world, frankly. If you haven't been to Red Rocks, it's an awesome, incredible experience. And that was pretty recent, on board, a pretty recent property we onboarded. And it's the sort of property that we want to align with. It's meaningful to folks in greater Denver, I would say Colorado and beyond, but it's certainly meaningful to folks in Colorado, point of pride, and something we want to align ourselves with, because frankly it makes sense for us. We're a significant hub for us in Denver. And a great way for us to accentuate our sponsorship portfolio out there, along with our relationship with the Denver Broncos.
Excellent. I'm glad that you mentioned them. Red Rocks is their sponsorship guy, a great guy. So interesting follow-up from Alex, who asked that question, and that is, so how do you approach? You have a lot of, on the sports side, a lot of teams in certain markets, and how do you approach sponsoring those teams when the league may have a competitive airline at the league level? Does that affect how you kind of assess those kind of opportunities?
It's certainly a challenge. I would say the NBA and Emirates is probably a very good example of that. And I would say, for how I usually think about it and approach it, is really focusing on Bulls fans and what makes them tick, and how they interact with the Bulls, and how they interact with the content. Same thing with Warriors, right? And just really owning in on that. Obviously, Emirates is all over the court on broadcasts, right? The thing there is that there's less of an endemic tie to the teams playing, and more of essentially a brand play for Emirates, right? So where I approach it is that I need to tap into what the fans care about. I need to tap into where the fans are and interacting with their team. And it's challenging, sure, but it's something certainly we measure against and test our activations against to make sure that we're standing out.
Yeah. Well, and there are pros and cons. I've always said to league level sponsorships versus teams, and again, depending on the brand and the objectives, neither one is it's not, oh, you should do one and not the other. But you can get so much out of a team sponsorship that doesn't, again, as you said, Derek, doesn't matter that there might be another airline involved with the league. That's not good. That really isn't relevant to me as in this case a Bulls fan, right? That's okay. That's great. I see them there on the court or whatever, but you can still do all the activations that are targeted at Bulls fans. And yeah, are you sharing the space a little bit? Sure, but does that really matter in most cases? Not if you're doing the activations well, I would say.
Yep, exactly. That's I mentioned the Magic. Yeah, the Magic sponsorships is it's when you activate it, right? And if I let a logo, detract from what I'm trying to accomplish, then I'm just not doing my job. And I like the way you said it. It depends on your goals and objectives, right? Like obviously, a league deal is a little different. A team deal is a little different from a stadium deal is a little different from aligning with a property, right? And every brand has different goals and objectives depending on what they're trying to accomplish there. And for us, again, say it all the time: global airline, hub-based focus, regional focus, team-based relationships make a lot of sense for our strategy and where we're going. And so that's why our portfolio has a good amount of them. And I always say, like, teams. I try and coach myself. Red Rocks is a great example. It's like teams, properties, locations that are meaningful and are important, to that particular metro area, right? That are meaningful, that have value, right? So that's really what I'm getting at.
Yeah. So we talk about the successful programs, and please, if there are any others, feel free to talk about it. But I always like to ask, because we all know that some of the best lessons come from things that didn't work. So is there a lesson learned from something in your experience where you said, boy, that glad I'm only glad we did that because now I know what not to do or how to do things better.
Yeah. I think it really boils down to a couple. I won't name examples, but I will name a couple buckets.
Yeah.
So I think the first thing is not focusing enough on objectives. Sometimes an activation, might score well in terms of metrics, but just doesn't make a dent in your objectives locally, right? And it's like if you're not moving the needle on your objectives, then why are you doing that activation in the first place? I mentioned a comment earlier about having honest conversations with the properties that you sponsor. And that kind of goes along with it, right? If you're in the middle of a program and it's just not really, moving the needle, just making sure everybody's on the same page, and somebody could say, well, this isn't really doing it for us. I appreciate our efforts. I appreciate our efforts doing it, but taking a hard look at it and realizing, what, we just didn't focus enough on the objective when we put this idea there, right? And it's just so that's a big reason why sometimes it's just not focusing on objectives. And like for me, that's something I just ground myself in almost every day. Is what I'm doing right now actually meeting an objective for us? Is what I'm doing right now making an impact for United? And it's like if I'm being honest with myself and it's not, then rethink why I'm doing it in the first place. So I think that's a big thing, just not focused enough on objectives. The second one is I kind of alluded to this in my first answer, but it's not pivoting fast enough. Um, you know, I remember one of the classes I took. We were talking a bit about sunk cost fallacy, and that's applicable here. Just because you've spent X amount of dollars and Y amount of time on a given project, if you're kind of seeing that light at the end of the tunnel, and you're not seeing that you're going to be accomplishing what you're setting out to accomplish, I would take a real hard look at what you're doing and seeing if you can pivot off of it.
Right.
Because just because you feel like you've invested so much time and energy, it doesn't mean that it's going to go somewhere. And you're probably better off pausing. Yeah, I mentioned earlier, taking a hard look at your objectives, the reason why you're doing this in the first place, and pivoting. Easier said than done. I'm saying this from a place of, we didn't pivot, and then that's how it happened. It's like, oh well, I guess that's what happened. But that's just something I just keep in mind for any of the programs that we're doing, and it's important. And just don't put good money towards good programs. Don't put good money after bad programs. So,
well, I think that's really important. I mean, it's easy to kind of think, oh, we're going to set it and forget it, right? When it's like we went in with we knew what our objectives were. We signed the deal. We got our benefits, and then we've got our activation programs. They're going to go, and then boom, off we go. And like you said, we don't necessarily stop to look and say, hey, how is this doing? And a lot of us are guilty of that with all things, be it my financial portfolio, right? It's like, no, you gotta, that's why the financial advisor is like, hey, let's check in because maybe things change. And I think it's really important from the context of the properties to understand that smart sponsors are going to do that, right? And they're going to not wait 6, 9, 12 months to say how are things working. They're going to be doing those kind of check-ins, and when they see in month 3 that we're not on the right track, we're not heading straight to that light at the end of the tunnel, they may come back to a partner and say, can we make some changes? And that's where, and again, none of this is easy, right? But some of it is critically important. I'm always advising properties. It's like where you can be as flexible as possible. Your partners are going to need that. We all saw that, obviously, the big smack in the face for all of us, but that was COVID, right? That we all had to pivot and do different things. But even now, on a daily basis, like you said, something might come up or something's not working. We go back and we're not talking about renegotiating an entire agreement, but are there some things that we can change out? Do you have the ability to be flexible and help us out with that? So that's a really important conversation.
I feel like sometimes I would even say that in a conversation. I was like, when trying to shift in and out assets, like it's not like we're negotiating the whole deal here. We're just talking about a couple little activation points here. But when you talk about, again, having that honest conversation, that's really when you kind of reach into that well of, hey, this asset that we talked about in 2022, it's like it's 2026 now. We're as well as I do, it's like this isn't where we are as an airline anymore. So can we shift it? Can we shift it and shift this asset and have it do something else? And honestly, I feel like our properties in general, they get it, and that's what I love is. Just because it says in our deal doesn't mean we can't shift things around over the course of time. And frankly, it serves everybody well when a property has some level of flexibility and understands that their partner's strategies shift. And I get it. It's not easy. You've got 50, 60, 70 plus partners, some of these entities have. I get it. but it's when you have those honest relationships, with each of the properties that you have. Check in when you can, have those good conversations with them. That's really where you can make a difference and shift things around and have what you're accomplishing for that partner, have it be meaningful and continually fresh. So I'll just.
And that's kind of related to, there were a couple of questions related to this, and that's what are you looking at United in terms of evaluating performance, whether it's midterm, whether it's end of term, or whatever? What kind of metrics are really important for you?
Yeah, with each team, entity, property, right? We have individual KPIs. We have a vision for success with them. To me, it's like a base level. I would call it like a base level of visibility. Also some level of emotional connection with fans. Essentially understanding how they feel about United, brand perception, and then ultimately, are they buying in United? One thing that we do with some of our largest, most visible relationships, we actually implement our own brand impact studies, where basically we measure both fans and non-fans, and then fans aware and unaware of our sponsorship within a given market, and basically measure against brand awareness, our preference locally, perception of United and our brand, whether we're being authentic to the fans with our activations, purchase intent, that sort of thing, right? So, really just trying to understand how fans think and feel about United locally, and whether our sponsorship's actually moving the needle. I mentioned earlier, at the end of the day, we want folks to buy United because it's the best choice for them, right? And a great way to, again, own in that emotional connection is sponsorship. So at the end of the day, we want to make sure that our sponsorships are doing exactly that. So those brand impact studies are certainly very useful in evaluating how our sponsorships and activations are doing, but I would say also inform us on our next activation, right? And how we're approaching activations, in the upcoming season and beyond. So, you talk about measuring and putting it into action. Those brand impact studies are certainly a big part of that.
Yeah, that's great, and that actually leads right into an audience question, which is, we're talking about performance metrics, but this one's a little bit more about what kind of data points or insights and analytics are you using to, as they say, dial in on what the fans are thinking when you're doing the brainstorming. So what kind of insights are you pulling from to say, okay, we think this would work, maybe this wouldn't?
Yeah. So because we have so many sponsorships, we will implement a similar activation a couple different ways across properties, and then have a pretty good idea in the back end obviously, and how they performed relative to that audience. Kind of going back to the KPI measure. A big thing for us is authenticity, and that's one of the questions that we survey. Is United enhancing your experience as a fan? Is United contributing to your fandom, right? Like those types of questions, really owning into, and also really owning in on some desirable brand traits for United, right? Is United a brand for me? Do I have an emotional connection with United? Those are also elements that we measure, down to the team, down to the team level. And we'll see, across properties, obviously some properties performing, I would say United scoring better with some properties than others. And then it's really just kind of drilling down into, well, why is that, or why isn't that? And we can kind of take some of those metrics and key understandings out of those metrics, right, and try and apply that towards our activation strategy for other teams. So I've mentioned several times, it's creating that emotional connection. That's really a big key to a lot of this, and measuring against that emotional connection. That's certainly critical for us in order to help, in order to understand if we're making an emotional connection or not with our fans.
Yeah, great. Do you find that the teams, the properties that you're working with are better at helping pull out some of the insights, the fan engagement measures, and some things that might be specific to United than maybe they were 5-10 years ago?
Absolutely. And there's a whole suite of options out there that I'm honestly kind of amazed. I feel like every year there's either a new product or a new company that's drilling deeper into measuring sponsorship ROI, right? And obviously we do our own brand impact studies, right? But frankly, what the teams provide is pretty useful as well. I trust when teams are using third-party data to relay performance metrics to me. And a big reason of that is usually it's pretty transparent. A lot of times they'll even convey how United's performing, relative to other brands that they're, doing this survey or doing this surveying with, or using these measurables with. Like that's important, and it shows me that the teams care about how well they're performing. And honestly, it's a good way to start having that honest conversation about performance. And I've found that having those honest conversations around performance, whether it's third party measured, whether we measure it ourselves, really useful and gets everybody on the right track. It's not, to me, it's not meant to be combative. It's purely meant to measure whether things are successful, unsuccessful, somewhere in between. It just really helps everybody accomplish what they're trying to accomplish, right? And like I said at the top, there's a lot of great products out there that properties can invest in order to help teams or help sponsors accomplish their goals and objectives, and really clearly outline, like, hey, here's how this performed, here's how that performed. Seeing all that data, here's some of our thoughts on what we can do better. That just helps everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. Another audience question from Brooks, and I have a feeling I know how you're going to answer this one, but it says, when considering sponsorships, do you lean to media-heavy packages or personal touch activations within events?
Yeah, I would say I generally lean, personal touches within an event, personal touches within events, or I feel like I probably said the word emotion, more in this hour than I have in a while. But
there's a reason for that. It's important.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's certainly not to say that advertising is important, and frankly, it's part of our larger, certainly a big part of our larger United's larger, communication strategy, right? So, as it pertains to sponsorships, though, we really try and lean into, understanding what fans care about, where fans are, and meeting them there, right? And I would say when you talk about our activation dollars and where the next best dollar is spent, it is usually focused on that for sure.
Got a few more minutes, Derek. Let me just ask a couple of things. One's pretty straightforward question, and that's about business back. Do you expect your property partners to commit to purchasing tickets to flying United? Is that part of the agreements usually?
Yeah, I would say it's a nice to have. I won't get too prescriptive on, specificity, but I'll just say this. Here's the thing: a lot of the teams and entities that we align with, obviously, they're in our hub cities, so plenty of connectivity for that partner. And obviously, I mentioned this earlier. I believe using our product is a great proof point for us. Which is why we're proud to fly so many sports teams. That's actually one of our marketing claims. Proud to fly X. So certainly part of our conversation, because it really just strengthens our claim, right? And frankly, it strengthens the understanding of that property on our product. Like I love hearing about when somebody flew United somewhere and is like, oh, you know what? I experienced Starlink Wi-Fi for the first time.
Right.
It was amazing. Like, blew me away. Love hearing that. I really don't even mind if somebody's like, I had a delay the last time I flew. It's like, you know what? Feedback is great, and understanding how people experience United is great. And we're trying to be the biggest and best airline every day, and feedback good or bad, we need all of it. And I would say that living our product is a great way to speak about our product. So it's certainly nice to have, I would say.
Yeah. I mean, to me, it goes to authenticity, right? It's like
Absolutely.
if I'm saying that this is my official airline, I'm going to try and fly them as much as possible, right? But,
yep, absolutely.
Well, Derek, my last question for you is my standard thing that I always like to wrap up these webinars with, and I call it either a myth to bust or fact to trust. So I'll throw this following statement out and tell me whether it's a myth or a fact, or maybe it's somewhere in between. But statement would be, in the airline category, it is very difficult to tie sponsorships directly to ticket sales.
That's a great question for this, Jim. And I'll take the cop out route, and I'll consider this somewhere in between. But I'll go into that. Let me talk about some of this, during this conversation, right? There's a lot of factors that are baked into customer decisions behind buying an airline ticket, like one airline ticket, right? We're talking about schedule, we're talking about a loyalty program that they're in, you're talking about a credit card, onboard amenities that they receive from that airline, right? Emotional connection to that airline, or even just like the value adds that airline may or may not have relative to their competitors, right? There's so much that's wrapped into why somebody buys a ticket. But I would say this, though, and this is kind of what we kind of measure against. There's a lot that sponsorships can affect within some of those decisions, some of those components that underpin that decision to buy a ticket. I mean, part of our brand impact studies, like, we straight up ask, have you bought a ticket on United because of our sponsorship, right? And the numbers certainly tell us that people have. Okay. So I would say, like, it is difficult to literally say that sponsorships contributed to $25 of this revenue coming in. Right. But what we can say is that, and this goes back to, frankly, a lot of the smart people that work at United. There's a lot of smart people working at United that are conveying the benefits of working at United effectively, or the benefits of flying United effectively, and all of that, including our sponsorships, are contributing to folks more routinely flying United, right? And I think that us, along with everybody else, all the other teams at United, we do a good job of pulling in the same end of the rope. And I think we're doing a good job of highlighting, our unique value proposition in every market we serve. That was probably a lot of words that kind of answered your question, but I
No,
think
that's and it's, you know, it's an unfair question. It is not, you know, either, you know, perfectly a fact or perfectly a myth. And no, I think the explanation was very helpful in terms of, again, you know, as we all look at, you know, how does a partner or a potential partner, whether it's United or somebody else in the category, thinking about these things and how can we best work with them? I think that was a great answer. And I think the last 60 minutes have been great. Really appreciate you again, Derek, for joining us and giving us some real insights into what you're working on and into the whole partnership business. So can't thank you enough for joining us. And also want to just say thank you to everyone who was with us. Thanks for some great questions. Reminder that this webinar and the other webinars that we've been doing here at Sponsor CX are available on demand if you want to check those out. I think Laura put the YouTube link in the attendee chat, so check out all of the other ones. We'll have more upcoming for you in May. We're still working on exactly those topics and those guests, so stay tuned. Look your email inboxes. You'll be getting some notifications very shortly about our next webinars. But for now, we'll just say thanks to everybody again for attending. Big thanks to Derek, and we'll see you all soon.
Thanks, Jim. Appreciate it. Thanks everybody for tuning in.